Hello, and welcome to LURK, the Insomnia Files. If you're awake right now, staring into the dark while the rest of the world sleeps, you're in the right place. Many people listen to these stories to relax. Others listen because sleep refuses to come. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. A bedroom, a car, a quiet house that doesn't feel as empty as it should. If these stories speak to you, make sure you like the video and subscribe. To LURK, the Insomnia Files. Now get comfortable, lower the lights, take a slow breath, and let's open tonight's file. My friend told me this story last night, and even now I can't stop thinking about it. It's one of those quiet stories, the kind that doesn't rely on anything dramatic or violent, but instead settles into your mind and refuses to leave. The more casually she told it, the more unsettling it felt. There was no exaggeration in her voice, no attempt to make it sound scary. If anything, that's what made it worse. Her mom has always loved harp music, not casually either. It's been a constant presence for as long as my friend can remember. When she was a kid, the sound of the harp drifting through the house was just part of daily life, like the hum of the fridge or the ticking of a clock. Her mom owned an old record player, one of those heavy ones with a wooden casing and a clear plastic lid. It sat in the living room near the window, and beside it was a small collection of records. Most of them harp music, soft, slow, elegant pieces that filled the house without demanding attention. Her mom would play it while cooking, while cleaning, while reading. Sometimes it was loud enough to hear clearly from any room. Other times it was just a faint presence in the background, like the house itself was breathing. Over the years, everyone in the family learned to tune it out unless they really focused on it. It was comforting, familiar, and completely ordinary. That's why what happened one afternoon stood out so sharply. Her mom was working from home that day. She had shut herself into her bedroom with her laptop and a stack of papers, trying to concentrate on something that required her full attention. She needed silence. No music, no TV, no distractions. Before she started, she was careful about it. She went downstairs herself and made sure the record player was off. Not just turned down, but off completely. She unplugged it from the wall, something she didn't usually bother doing, just to be sure there would be no interruptions. Then she went back upstairs and got to work. After a while, she started to hear harp music. At first, she barely noticed it. It was so familiar that her brain almost ignored it automatically. But as a few seconds passed, she realized something was wrong. The music was coming from downstairs, clearer than background noise, distinct notes, gentle and deliberate, filling the space beneath her bedroom. Her first reaction wasn't fear, it was irritation. She raised her voice and called out to her family, telling them to turn the music off. She assumed someone had plugged the record player back in without telling her, or maybe they had put on a different device. She didn't even stop what she was doing at first. She just waited for the music to cut out. Instead, she heard her family calling back to her, their voices tense and urgent. They told her to come downstairs immediately, not to worry about her work, not to finish what she was doing, just to come down and see. That was the moment when irritation turned into confusion. When she walked downstairs, the harp music grew louder. It wasn't muffled or distorted. It sounded rich and full, as if the source was right there in the room. The living room was empty except for her family standing near the record player. They all had the same look on their faces, a mix of disbelief and quiet unease. The record player was unplugged. The cord was still coiled neatly beside the outlet, nowhere near the socket. The lid was closed. There was no record inside. Nothing was spinning, Nothing was moving, and yet the music was unmistakably coming from it. Not crackly, not warped, not distorted like an old machine might produce. It was the most beautiful harp music any of them had ever heard. Even my friend, who had grown up listening to harp music every day, said it didn't sound like anything she'd heard before. The notes were smooth and flowing, layered in a way that felt almost intentional, as if the music was responding to the room itself. They stood there in silence, listening. At first, someone tried to explain it. Maybe sound was coming from outside. Maybe a neighbor was playing music and it was echoing strangely through the house. Someone opened the front door. The music didn't change. Someone stepped outside and listened. There was nothing out there. The sound was only inside the house, only in that room. Another person suggested a phone, a hidden speaker, something electronic they hadn't noticed. They checked everything. Phones were on the table, screens dark, no Bluetooth speakers, no radios, nothing that could reasonably produce sound. The music continued. Her mom sat down on the couch without realizing she was doing it. The irritation she'd felt earlier was gone completely. In its place was something else. Not exactly fear, not peace either. It was more like being held in place by the sound, as if standing up or interrupting it would somehow be wrong. Time passed strangely while the music played. No one checked the clock at first. They just listened. The melody shifted and evolved. On sometimes slow and gentle, sometimes fuller and more complex, it felt deliberate, structured, as though it was being performed rather than replayed. At one point, her mom started crying. Not sobbing, not panicking, just quiet tears sliding down her face. She couldn't explain why. She later said it felt deeply personal, like the music was reaching into parts of her she didn't usually think about. Memories surfaced without context, emotions without clear cause. And still, the record player sat there, lifeless. After about 2 hours, the music stopped. There was no dramatic ending, no final chord that rang out and echoed. It simply faded away, as if someone had gently lifted their hands from the strings and decided they were done. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. The silence that followed felt heavy. No one spoke for a long time. They just stood there, staring at the record player, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, someone broke the silence with a nervous laugh, and the moment shattered. They started talking over each other, trying to process what they'd just experienced. Her mom unplugged the record player again, even though it already was. She checked the outlet. She checked the cord. She opened the lid and stared at the empty space where the record should have been. There was no warmth, no vibration, no sign that anything had been producing sound at all. They never heard the music again. The record player continued to work normally after that. It only played music when it was plugged in. It only played records when there was a record inside. Nothing else like that ever happened in the house. But her mom stopped playing harp music as often after that day. She didn't get rid of the records, and she didn't say she was afraid of them. She just didn't reach for them the way she used to. When my friend asked her why, years later, she shrugged and said she didn't feel like she needed to anymore. When my friend finished telling me the story, she laughed a little and said it was probably just some weird acoustic thing. Or maybe they all misremembered parts of it. But the way she said it didn't sound convincing. It sounded like someone repeating an explanation they'd given themselves many times, hoping it would eventually feel true. I keep thinking about that unplugged record player, about the idea of something choosing to play music, not to scare anyone, not to announce itself, but simply because it could, because someone in that house loved it enough to listen. And I think that's what unsettles me the most. My mom tells me this story every single time we end up talking late into the night, usually when the house is quiet and there's nothing else to distract us. I've heard it so many times that I can almost picture it like a memory of my own, even though I was far too young to remember any of it. Still, no matter how often she tells it, she never rushes through it, and she never sounds unsure. If anything, the older she gets, the more certain she seems about what happened. Not long after I was born, my parents moved into their first house together. It wasn't new, not even close. It was an old house in an old part of town, the kind of neighborhood where the streets feel narrower than they should, and every home looks like it's holding on to decades of stories. For anyone from Calgary, it was in Sunnyside. At the time, my parents didn't think much of that. They were young, broke, and excited to finally have a place of their own. Old houses were cheaper, and character mattered more to them than convenience. From the beginning, the house felt strange. Not in a dramatic way. There were no obvious signs of anything being wrong. It was more subtle than that. Sounds would come from rooms no one was in. Floorboards would creak in patterns that didn't match footsteps. Objects would be left in one place and turn up somewhere else later, not far away, but just enough to make my parents question themselves. Did they move it? Did the other one touch it? Most of the time, they brushed it off. Old houses make noise. Old houses settle. Old houses have drafts. One thing they noticed almost immediately, though, was the air. The air currents in the house didn't behave the way they should have. Doors would be closed, windows sealed, and yet things that were light enough to move would drift on their own. Paper would slide across tables. Dust would swirl in odd patterns. Anything that could float seemed to have a destination. My mom used to joke that the house breathed, but even then she said it never felt quite like a joke. The strangest part was the doorways. Anything light enough to be carried by air would collect there. Not randomly, either. Balloons, bits of paper, even fabric would slowly move toward door frames as if guided. Sometimes they would float from one room into another. Sometimes they would rise, drifting upward toward the stairs. My parents tried to explain it away as pressure differences, as old vents, as poor insulation. But no explanation ever fully fit. Then came the day near my birthday. I was still very young, barely more than a toddler. My mom had bought a few balloons for the occasion. Nothing fancy, just bright, simple balloons to make the house feel a little more cheerful. That day, it was just the two of us at home. My dad was out, and the house was quiet except for the usual background sounds. I was upstairs in my crib, awake and restless, doing whatever it is toddlers do when left alone with their thoughts. My mom was downstairs in the kitchen, moving around, tidying up, maybe thinking about dinner or the small plans she had made for my birthday. Nothing felt unusual to her at first. Then one of the balloons moved. It didn't jerk or shoot across the room. It didn't act like it had been hit by a sudden gust. It lifted slowly, gently, from the next room over. My mom noticed it out of the corner of her eye and watched as it drifted toward the doorway. It reached the corner, turned, and began floating toward the stairs. That was when the feeling hit her. She describes it as instant and overwhelming. Not worry, not concern, pure dread. The kind of fear that doesn't come from thought, but from instinct. Her body reacted before her mind did. She dropped what she was doing and ran. The balloon continued moving ahead of her, floating up the stairs toward the second floor, toward the room where I was. It didn't bob or sway the way balloons usually do. It moved with purpose, steady and calm, as if it knew exactly where it was going. My mom followed it, 2 steps at a time, her heart pounding. already certain that something was wrong, even though she didn't know what. When she reached the top of the stairs and rushed into my room, she stopped cold. I wasn't in my crib. Somehow I had managed to climb out. The crib was old, like most things in that house, and I'd apparently figured out how to swing myself over the side. I was across the room, halfway up an old wooden dresser. The drawers were pulled out just enough to act like steps, and I was using them exactly that way, climbing higher with the clumsy determination only a small child can have. The dresser was tall, solid, and very old. My mom says she doesn't remember crossing the room. She only remembers grabbing me. She pulled me off the dresser just as it began to tip forward. Had she been even a few seconds later, the weight of it would have come crashing down. She is certain it would have killed me. She didn't stop to think. She didn't stop to calm down. She didn't even check the rest of the house. She scooped me up, shaking and crying, and left. She didn't pack a bag or lock the door. She got in the car and drove straight to a family friend's house, barely able to explain what had happened when she arrived. They didn't go back right away. When they did, the house felt different to her. Quieter, maybe. Or maybe she was just too shaken to notice anything else. Not long after that, my parents made a decision that still surprises everyone who knows them. They hired a psychic medium. Even now, my mom laughs a little when she says it, because it was completely out of character for both of them, especially my dad. He is not the type to believe in spirits, or signs, or anything that can't be explained. But something about that house, about that moment, that had shaken them enough to try. The medium walked through the house, asked a few questions, and eventually told them that there was a presence there. Not a bad one, not something dangerous. According to her, it was a guardian spirit, something attached to the house or to me, watching over me. The balloon, she said, wasn't random. It was a warning. My parents didn't stay in that house forever. Eventually, they moved on, and nothing like that ever happened again. No strange air currents, no objects drifting on their own, no overwhelming sense of dread out of nowhere. My mom has never told the story as proof of anything. She doesn't insist it was supernatural. She doesn't try to convince anyone. She just tells it the same way every time, calmly, honestly, as something that happened. She always ends it the same way. Well, I don't know what to make of it, she says. All I know is that something got my attention when it mattered. And every time she says that, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if the balloon hadn't moved at all. There is a woman who works late shifts, the kind of job where the building is already half asleep by the time she clocks out. Most nights, the hallways are quiet, the lights dimmed, and the echo of her own footsteps feels louder than it should. That night was no different. She was tired, counting the minutes until she could get home, take off her shoes, and let the day finally end. It was well past midnight when she stepped out into the car park. The air was cool and still, the kind that makes every sound feel sharper. Her keys were already in her hand, threaded between her fingers the way her mother had taught her years ago. The car park was mostly empty, just a few scattered vehicles sitting under buzzing streetlights. She spotted her car near the far end, exactly where she'd left it. She didn't notice anything strange at first. She unlocked the door, got into the driver's seat, and shut it behind her with a solid click. She started the engine, adjusted the mirror out of habit, and pulled out of her space. The radio came on softly, some late-night talk show murmuring in the background as she headed toward the exit. That's when she noticed the headlights behind her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Another car leaving the car park around the same time wasn't unusual, but as she merged onto the main road, the car stayed behind her. Close, too close. Its headlights filled her rearview mirror, bright enough that she had to squint. Then the horn blared, a long, sharp blast that made her jump in her seat. She glanced in the mirror again. The car behind her flashed its high beams, on and off, like it was trying to get her attention. And her heart started to thump faster. Maybe she'd done something wrong. Maybe she'd cut him off pulling out of the lot. She changed lanes to let him pass. Instead of speeding past, the car swerved into the lane beside her. The driver leaned toward his open window, his arm hanging out as he shouted something she couldn't hear over the rush of wind and the hum of the road. His face was tense, angry, and his mouth was wide open as he yelled again, pointing at her car. She shook her head and stared straight ahead, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. Then he shouted something she could finally make out. "Pull over." Her stomach dropped. Every warning she'd ever been taught screamed in her head. Don't pull over, don't stop, don't engage. She pressed harder on the gas, hoping he'd give up, hoping he'd pass and disappear into the dark. He didn't. No matter how fast she went, he stayed with her. If she sped up, he sped up. If she slowed down, he stayed right on her tail, his headlights glued to her rear bumper. The horn blared again, louder this time, and the high beams flashed like strobe lights. Her breathing turned shallow. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She fumbled for her phone, then stopped, afraid to take one hand off the wheel. Her mind raced through every terrible possibility. Road rage, someone trying to scare her, someone trying to hurt her. She took a sharp turn, then another, hoping to lose him. He followed. Her fear turned into full panic. She felt trapped, like an animal being herded. Her eyes darted from the road to the mirror and back again. The man in the other car kept shouting, his face twisted with urgency, pounding his hand against his door. She didn't know what to do. Then she saw the sign, Police Station, 1 mile. Hope surged through her chest like electricity. She slammed her hand down on the horn and held it there, the sound screaming through the empty streets as she pushed the car harder than she ever had before. The police station came into view, lights glowing bright against the darkness. She tore into the car park, tires squealing as she swerved to a stop right in front of the building. She threw the car into park, yanked the door open, and stumbled out, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. The front door of the station burst open. A police officer came running out, followed by another, and then another. The woman was crying now, words tumbling out of her mouth too fast to make sense. She pointed back toward the road, toward the car that had chased her. The man pulled into the car park behind her. More officers spilled out of the building, their guns already drawn, voices loud and sharp as they shouted commands. The man stepped out of his car slowly, hands raised high above his head. He looked shaken, out of breath, but not angry anymore. If anything, he looked relieved. "Check her back seat," he said calmly. The officers didn't hesitate. One of them moved to the woman's car, opened the rear door, and froze. Curled low on the floor behind the driver's seat was another man. He was wearing a balaclava, the fabric stretched tight over his face. In his hand was a large knife, the blade catching the light as the officer pulled him out. The man struggled for only a moment before he was pinned to the ground and disarmed. The woman stared, her mind refusing to understand what she was seeing. The police explained it to her later, once she was sitting inside the station, wrapped in a blanket, shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup of water they gave her. As she had pulled out of the car park earlier that night, the man in the second car had seen something she hadn't. He'd seen movement in her back seat. He'd seen a figure rise up, a knife raised, ready to strike. He'd seen the masked man lean forward, aiming for her throat. Without thinking, he'd laid on his horn and flashed his lights, hoping to scare the attacker. It worked. The man in the back seat dropped to the floor, hiding as the car sped down the road. The Good Samaritan hadn't chased her to hurt her. He'd chased her to save her life. Every horn blast, every flash of light, every scream to pull over. It was all meant to keep her alive long enough to reach safety. The realization hit her all at once, and she broke down completely. The police told her she was lucky, incredibly lucky. If she'd pulled over, if she'd ignored the horn and gone straight home, if the man behind her hadn't been paying attention, she might not have survived the night. Later, lying awake in her bed, she replayed it all over and over again. The flashing lights, the shouting, the fear that had filled her chest like poison. She realized how close she'd come to dying without ever knowing why. From that night on, she always checked her back seat before getting into her car, every single time, because sometimes the thing chasing you isn't the danger. Sometimes it's the only reason you're still alive, just for a moment. If this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe to LURK, the Insomnia Files. This channel is dedicated to real accounts, disturbing encounters, and unexplained moments shared by people who never expected anything to go wrong until it did. New files are released regularly, usually when most people are asleep. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case when the night feels a little too quiet. Now, back to the story. When I was in my early teens, my family lived in a rural area, though not the kind of rural where you are completely cut off from the world. Our house sat on a large plot of land, somewhere between 10 and 15 acres. We had neighbors, but they were far enough away that you never expected anyone to just show up unannounced. If someone came over, it was planned. A call first, a wave from the road, something normal. Random visits simply did not happen, especially not in the middle of the night. That night is burned into my memory in a way I don't think will ever fade. It was somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. I had always been a night owl, and back then I often stayed up far later than I should have. I was alone in our media room, sitting on the floor with the television on low volume so I wouldn't wake anyone. The rest of the house was dark and quiet. My parents were asleep. The only sounds were the faint hum of electronics and the occasional creak of the house settling, the kind of noises you get used to when you grow up somewhere quiet. I was relaxed, half watching whatever late-night program was on, when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. I froze instantly. My first thought was simple and very loud in my head. No, absolutely not. Nobody normal rings a doorbell at 2 or 3 in the morning. Not friends, not family, not anyone with good intentions. The hair on my arms stood up, and my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I muted the TV and stayed perfectly still, listening. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then the doorbell rang again. Longer this time, more impatient. Every instinct I had told me to stay away from the front door. I didn't even want to stand up. I felt small, exposed, like prey that had just realized it was being watched. Slowly, carefully, I lowered myself to the floor and began crawling, keeping as close to the wall as I could. The media room had a corner that allowed you to peek toward the front door without being seen easily. I moved toward that spot, my palms sweating, my breathing shallow. Before I even reached the corner, the doorbell stopped. For half a second, I felt a strange sense of relief. Then the pounding started. It wasn't knocking. It wasn't polite or hesitant. It was violent. Heavy fists slamming against the front door again and again, the sound echoing through the house. The door itself rattled slightly with each hit. Whoever was out there was not trying to be subtle, that they wanted in, now. At that moment, any doubt I had disappeared. This was wrong. This was dangerous. I didn't even try to look toward the door anymore. I was already planning how fast I could get to my parents' bedroom when something happened that sent pure terror through my body. There was a sharp tapping noise on the glass behind me, not from far away, not from across the room, from the window directly behind me, no more than 6 inches from where my head was. My blood ran cold. The sound was deliberate, fingertips or knuckles tapping lightly, almost casually, as if whoever was doing it knew exactly how terrifying it would be. My body locked up for a split second, fear pressing down on me so hard I thought I might pass out. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned my head. At first, all I could see was darkness. The window reflected the faint glow of the TV screen, making it hard to see outside. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the outline of a man standing right there on the other side of the glass. He was close. Way too close. I couldn't see his face clearly, only his shape. Tall, solid, still. The moment my eyes met his silhouette, he realized I could see him. Without hesitation, he clicked on a flashlight and pointed it directly at me. The sudden burst of light blinded me. I threw my arm up instinctively, but it was too late. I knew without a doubt that he had seen me clearly. A kid, alone, frozen in fear. In that instant, my brain went into full panic mode. Let me be clear about what I understood in that moment. There were at least 2 people at my house in the middle of the night. One was violently pounding on the front door. Another had somehow opened the gate to our backyard, walked around the house, and was now standing inches away from me, shining a flashlight directly into my face through the window. Nothing about this felt accidental. Nothing about this felt safe. I don't remember making a decision to scream. It just happened. A raw, desperate sound ripped out of my throat, louder than I ever thought I could be. I scrambled backward, my movements clumsy and frantic, slipping on the floor as I tried to get away. I ran, crawled, stumbled, doing anything I could to put distance between myself and that window. I bolted through the hallway toward my parents' bedroom, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I burst through their door without knocking, screaming and crying at the same time, barely able to form words. My parents jolted awake instantly. My dad was on his feet in seconds, asking what was wrong as he pulled on pants. I tried to explain, but everything came out tangled and panicked. Someone at the door, someone at the window, flashlight, backyard. They're trying to break in. I couldn't slow down enough to speak clearly. My dad didn't hesitate. He went straight to his dresser, opened it, and took out the gun he kept there. I had seen it before, but never in a situation like this. The sight of it both scared me and made me feel slightly safer. He told my mom to stay with me, then walked out of the room moving quickly but carefully. I stayed where I was, shaking uncontrollably, listening. The house felt impossibly quiet again, every sound magnified by my fear. I could hear my own breathing, my pulse roaring in my ears. Somewhere far away, I heard voices, muffled but firm. My dad's voice, another man's voice, calm, authoritative. Then I heard my dad say something that confused me completely. "Oh, fuck, sorry, officer. I didn't know you were police. My son said there was somebody trying to break in." "Officer." The word didn't make sense at first. A few minutes later, my dad came back into the room. His expression was serious, but no longer tense. He sat down and explained what had happened. Apparently, there had been ongoing issues with the local phone lines in our area. Something about crossed wires or faulty connections. Occasionally, someone's phone line would randomly dial 911 without anyone actually making the call. That night, our house had been one of them. The police had received a silent emergency call from our address. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They came to investigate. Then one officer went to the front door. Another circled around the back of the house, checking the perimeter. When no one answered the door immediately, they escalated, assuming someone inside might be in trouble. The pounding, the flashlight, the presence in the backyard, all of it had been a police welfare check. The man at the window had been a cop. Logically, it made sense. Emotionally, it didn't help much. Even knowing the truth, the fear didn't fade right away. My body stayed tense for hours afterward. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak, every distant sound made me flinch. The image of that silhouette in the window, the sudden blast of light, stayed burned into my mind. Looking back now, I can laugh about it a little. The axe murderer I was convinced had come for me turned out to be a local police officer doing his job. Had no harm intended, no danger after all. But at the time, standing alone in the dark with fists pounding on the door and a flashlight snapping on inches from my face, it was the most terrifying experience of my life. Even now, years later, I still don't like unexpected knocks at night. And I always check the windows first. I was 14 when this happened, and I'm 21 now. Even after all these years, it still feels close, like it's sitting right behind my eyes, waiting for me to think about it, so it can come rushing back. Back then, people used to call me the shy girl, the quiet one, the outcast. I didn't talk much, didn't fit in, and didn't really know how to. I kept my head down at school and learned how to disappear into corners. Most days I felt invisible, and honestly, that felt safer. I had one real friend. His name was Brandon. Brandon was different from everyone else. He didn't treat me like I was fragile or strange. He never laughed at me for being quiet. He didn't pressure me to be loud or outgoing. He just talked to me like I mattered. We would meet at the park almost every day after school, by climbing trees and sitting in the branches like it was our own world. We talked about stupid things, deep things, nothing things. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. He always knew how to make me smile, even on days when I didn't think smiling was possible. You might think this is going to be a sad story about friendship or loss, but that's not even the worst part. That morning started like every other morning. I woke up from my usual nightmare, the kind I had almost every night. My heart condition made my sleep restless, and the medication didn't help much with the dreams. I rolled over, waited for my breathing to calm down, and then went through my routine. Take my pills, take a shower, get dressed. On weekends, I didn't have school, so I usually went straight to my computer to check messages and distract myself. That Saturday morning, when I logged into my DeviantArt account, I noticed I had a new note. That wasn't normal for me. I barely posted anything, and the only messages I ever got were random roleplay requests I ignored. I almost didn't click it. Something about it made my stomach feel tight. But curiosity won. The message was short, but the second I read it, my skin prickled. It said it was from Brandon. It said he wanted to see me at the park at 5 that evening. It told me not to be late. and then it said something that made my chest feel cold. It said he would be watching me. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands felt numb. At first, I laughed it off in my head. Brandon liked to joke around sometimes. Maybe it was his idea of being creepy for fun. But then I noticed the username. Brandon didn't have a DeviantArt account. And even if he did, it wouldn't have been that name. The account that sent the message wasn't his. Trying to convince myself I was overthinking, I replied and asked who it was. As soon as I sent the message, I clicked on the account. It was gone. Deleted. That's when my phone rang. It was Brandon. He sounded normal, relaxed, like nothing was wrong. He asked if I was going to the park that day. My heart started beating faster. I asked him what time. He said 5 o'clock. My throat went dry. I hesitated before answering, but I didn't tell him about the message. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, a bad joke, something stupid I was blowing out of proportion. After we hung up, I stared at the message again. The words felt heavier now, like they knew I was scared. At 4:50, I left the house. The park was only a 5-minute walk away, but I wanted to be early. Being early made me feel like I had control. The sky was starting to darken, the sun sinking low and casting long shadows across the grass. I went straight to our tree. It was big and old, with a hollow space inside that we used as our hiding spot. I climbed in and pulled my knees to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. The inside of the tree was darker than I expected, and the quiet felt thick. I had the strangest feeling like I wasn't alone, even though I knew that was impossible. I kept telling myself to calm down. Then I heard bushes moving. I nearly screamed. I leaned out of the tree and saw Brandon. Relief washed over me so fast it made me dizzy. I smiled and told him to climb up. He smiled back and started climbing, but then he stopped. He froze, staring past me. I asked him what was wrong. That's when I jumped down. The second my feet hit the ground, I knew I had made a mistake. Something big and dark came charging toward us from the trees. It moved fast, faster than anything I had ever seen move on 2 legs. I screamed and grabbed Brandon's hand, and we ran. We ran toward the playground, toward the dome structure the younger kids used to crawl through. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. My lungs burned. We scrambled inside and pressed ourselves against the plastic, trying not to make a sound. Inside, it was dark. There were small windows, just enough to see shadows shifting outside. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven. Then I heard something else. Someone else was breathing, too. Brandon looked at me. We didn't say anything. We just nodded and split up, hoping to confuse whoever was in there with us. I went left. I don't remember every detail after that. Trauma does that to you. It blurs things. But I remember his face. I remember his clothes, torn and filthy. I remember the way his eyes looked when he saw me. I remember the flash of metal. I screamed. I kicked. Pain shot through my leg. I saw the knife. I crawled away, shaking so badly I could barely move. I hid in a corner of the dome, my whole body screaming for me to run even though I couldn't. Time stopped meaning anything. Eventually, I saw red and blue lights flashing through the plastic, sirens, voices. I crawled out and ran toward them, sobbing. Police cars filled the park, and then I saw my brother. I collapsed into his arms. They found Brandon later. I wish I hadn't seen him. I wish someone had stopped me. I still see him when I close my eyes. I still see the blood. I still see the man's face. It wasn't dirt on him. It was Brandon's blood, and that's the part that never leaves me. I really wish this were not a true story, but I had the worst luck of living through something that feels like it should only exist as an urban legend people tell late at night. Even now, years later, thinking about it makes my chest tighten in the same way it did back then. I still replay that night in my head sometimes, wondering how close I came to opening the door, wondering how different everything could have been if I had made one small choice differently. Before that night, I truly believed apartments were safer than houses. Houses, in my mind, were where scary things happened. They had basements and attics, long hallways, dark corners, and rooms you rarely used. Apartments felt simpler and more secure. Everything was close together. You had neighbors on all sides. You were high up, about far away from the ground, and from anyone who might want to get inside. At the time, I was living alone in a unit on the 16th floor of a high-rise building in downtown Toronto. It felt modern and solid, the kind of place where nothing truly bad could happen. I've always loved horror movies, so I was used to strange noises. The building was old enough to have character, which also meant it had its fair share of creaks and rattles. Pipes knocked, walls popped. Sometimes I could hear footsteps above me or muffled voices through the ceiling. I always brushed it off as neighbors living their lives, or the plumbing doing what old plumbing does. I slept soundly almost every night, convinced that nothing could really touch me up there. That night started out completely normal. My boyfriend was out of town on a business trip, and then I had the apartment to myself. I stayed up late watching TV, flipping through channels and half paying attention while scrolling on my phone. Around 2 a.m, I finally started to feel sleepy. My eyes burned, my head felt heavy, and I decided it was time to go to bed. I turned off the lights one by one as I moved through the apartment, enjoying the quiet that comes with living alone late at night. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. It couldn't have been more than an hour after I fell asleep. At first, I didn't even understand why I was awake. I lay there in the dark, confused and groggy, my mind still wrapped in sleep. Then I heard it again, and my heart skipped. Someone was knocking on my front door. The sound cut through the silence in a way that instantly made me alert. My bedroom was at the very back of the apartment, as far from the front door as possible, but there was no mistaking where the sound was coming from. It wasn't a noise from the building or something outside. Someone was standing right there in the hallway, knocking on my door. Still half asleep and suddenly very aware that I was alone, I stayed in bed and listened. I told myself to stay calm, to give it a moment. Maybe it was nothing. There it was again. Knock, knock, knock. My pulse started to race. I sat up slightly, listening harder now. Every part of me felt tense. My first thought was that I should get up and see who it was. That felt like the responsible thing to do. But at the same time, something deeper and quieter inside me told me not to move. It wasn't a logical thought. It was instinct. It told me to stay still and stay quiet. The knocking came again, faster this time, more urgent. I started arguing with myself in my head. Maybe it was a neighbor who needed help. Maybe someone had locked themselves out. Maybe I was being paranoid. I hated the idea of being cowardly, of ignoring someone who might be in trouble. But before I could convince myself to get out of bed, the knocking changed. It turned into pounding. Not just loud knocking, but heavy, aggressive blows against the door, the kind of sound that vibrates through the walls and makes you feel it in your bones. My stomach dropped. Any remaining thought of opening the door disappeared in an instant. Whoever was out there was not calmly asking for help. They were demanding entry. I stayed frozen in my bed, barely breathing. I told myself that if they really needed help, they would go to another apartment. I was alone, a woman in the middle of the night. and there was nothing I could do to help anyone in that moment. I prayed that whoever it was would get frustrated and leave. The pounding went on. It felt endless. Seconds stretched into minutes. My arms and legs felt numb. Every time the sound paused, I thought it was over, only for it to start again. Sometimes it softened back into polite knocking, almost as if the person was trying a different approach. Then, without warning, it would explode into violent pounding again, harder than before. I honestly believed that at any second the door might break open. I wanted to grab my phone, but I was terrified to move. I didn't know who to call. The police felt like the obvious answer, but my thoughts were scrambled with fear. Part of me wondered if I was imagining it. The situation felt unreal, well, like a nightmare I hadn't woken up from yet. I was scared that any noise I made would let the person know someone was inside. I stayed perfectly still, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. Why weren't my neighbors coming out? Why wasn't anyone else calling for help? How could something like this be happening in a building full of people? What did this person want from me? The sounds blended together in my mind. Knocking, pounding, silence, then knocking again. My thoughts spiraled. Please stop. Please go away. Please. Then suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I lay there shaking, listening as hard as I could. My ears rang from the sudden quiet. I waited for the next sound, convinced it was coming. Nothing. I felt a wave of relief crash over me. It had given up. It had left. I whispered silent thank yous to no one in particular, my whole body trembling as the tension slowly eased. Then I heard something else. Scraping. Right outside my front door, there was a sharp, deliberate scratching sound. It sounded like fingernails being dragged across wood. Slow. Repetitive. Over and over again. The sound made my skin crawl in a way I can't fully describe. It felt personal, like whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing. After that, my memory gets hazy. I don't know if I passed out from exhaustion and fear, or if I simply stopped registering time. When I became aware again, the room was filled with daylight. Morning light spilled through my windows, and everything looked ordinary, calm, safe. For a moment I questioned everything. The night felt distant and unreal, like something I had dreamed. The sounds seemed impossible now, ridiculous in the light of day. I told myself I must have imagined it, that my mind had played tricks on me. Still, my heart started pounding again as I got out of bed. I moved quietly through the apartment, feeling foolish but nervous. The closer I got to the front door, the heavier my chest felt. My hand hovered in the air as I reached the hallway. Then there was a sharp knock on the door. I screamed, or yelped, or something between the two. Before I could even react, a voice called out from the other side, calm and firm. "It's okay. It's the police. Open up." The police. My knees nearly gave out. I rushed to the peephole and looked through it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely focus. A uniformed officer stood on the other side. Beyond him, I could see more police officers in the hallway. I unlocked the door and opened it, my heart still racing. The officer explained that someone had broken into the building during the night. Security footage showed them moving through different floors, knocking on doors, walking away, knocking again. As he spoke, I noticed paramedics and officers going in and out of my neighbor's apartment next door. Around 4 a.m, my neighbor had been killed. He was a young man, a little younger than me. He had opened his door, and the person outside had forced their way in. Another resident on a different floor eventually called the police after receiving threatening knocks of their own. When the police found the attacker, he was wandering the hallway on another floor, He was carrying a hunting knife, duct tape, and a plastic bag filled with body parts. The officer told me the man was schizophrenic and had tried to eat what was in the bag as the police closed in. I started hyperventilating as he spoke. My vision blurred. I told him, barely able to get the words out, that someone had been knocking on my door, too. He nodded slowly and asked me to step into the hallway so they could examine my door. That's when I saw it. Carved deep into the wood of my front door were words I hadn't noticed before. The letters were rough and uneven, scratched in with force. They spelled out 2 words. First choice. I still think about that every time I lock my door at night. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you. They stayed. Every file you heard tonight was shared by real people. Real fear, real uncertainty, real moments where something felt wrong, or almost did. And the most disturbing part, most of these stories don't end with answers. They end with silence, with questions, with the feeling that whatever was there might still be. If you want to keep exploring the cases that don't let go, subscribe to LURK, the Insomnia Files. There are many more files waiting, and not all of them close before it's too late.